In this video, we'll be working with fraction problem solving that involves unitizing and partitioning. In particular, we'll be working with discrete set models. Our first example shows 8 blue dots, a collection of 8 blue dots, and we call this set of 8 blue dots one whole, and I want to show 3/4 of a whole. Our strategy is going to be to represent our one whole in terms of fourths. Since we need 3/4, notice that 3/4 we can interpret as 3 parts, each worth 1/4 of a whole. So we need to break our whole into parts. We need to partition it such that we can see fourths. So we know that 1 is equivalent to 4/4, or 4 parts, each worth 1/4 of a whole. Here I can divide my set up into 4 equal parts, 4 parts, each worth 1/4 of a whole. To show 3/4 of a whole, I just need 3 parts, each worth 1/4 of a whole. 1 part, 2 parts, 3 parts. That example was pretty easy because we were given one whole. Let's draw the same set, but define it in a different way. So again, we want to think about the one whole in terms of thirds this time, since we're dealing with 2/3. So we eventually want to show 3/3, which we can think of as 3 parts, each worth 1/3 of a whole. Well, right now we have 2/3 of a whole, or 2 parts, each worth 1/3 of a whole. So when we look at these 8 blue dots, we need to look at them and see 2 parts, and then we're going to name those 2 parts. Each of those parts will be called 1/3. When I look at this, I can see if I break it up in this way, I have 2 parts, and then I'm going to name each part. This will be 1/3, and this will be 1/3. So now I have 2 parts, each worth 1/3 of a whole, or 2/3. So if I want to have one whole, 3 parts, each worth 1/3 of a whole, then I'm just going to add another column that contains 4 dots. So you can see that I have 3 parts, each worth 1/3 of a whole. And if we look at first the whole, and I only wanted to show 2/3 of that, well, I'd show 2 columns, and that's my 2/3. Let's extend this problem. We'll start with the same given conditions, where we have a set of 8 blue dots that we call 2/3 of a whole. But now, instead of asking for one whole, we're going to ask for 1/2 of a whole. This is an extension because even though the problem doesn't ask for one whole, if we went straight to 1/2 of a whole, we'd want to introduce an intermediate step. So we would go through the same process of marking 2 groups, each worth 1/3, and then having these 3 parts, each worth 1/3 for 3/3. And once we've established the whole, then we can break it into 2 equal parts to find 1/2. So let's draw our whole. This is one whole, and since we're working with a denominator of 2, we want to represent this as 2 parts, each worth 1/2. Well, here's our 1 part worth 1/2, and our second part also worth 1/2. So to show half of a whole, we need 1 part worth 1/2 of the whole, and we'll just draw it down here in the corner, where that's half of the whole. So the point of this problem was that sometimes it's helpful to introduce an intermediate step of one whole, and then we can partition it however we want to.